Hi, everyone, and welcome to Fierce Conversations with Toby, the show where we discover the silver lining in life's most difficult stories. I'm your host, Toby Dorr. Brittany, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Fierce Conversations with Toby.
Well, thank you for having me, Toby.
I'm so delighted. You know, we have really an interesting background. Jeanette Walls has always been my hero. You know, I read Glass Castle when it first came out. And then when I had my own crazy story to tell, Jeanette Walls, in telling her story, gave me permission to tell mine. So I've always been a huge fan of hers. And when my book came out, I really wanted her to write the foreword for it, but I didn't know her and I didn't know how to reach her. But last spring, her new novel came out, Hang the Moon, which was so good. And I had just had a total knee replacement, but she was doing a book signing in Washington, D.C. And it was only 3 weeks after my total knee replacement, but I said, I'm going anyway. And so I drove into D.C. and went to the book signing. And at the end of her presentation, she asked if there were any questions. And I stood up and told her that she had given me the courage to write my book. And I brought a copy of it to give to her. And so we've become friends since then. And I've been to a couple of her book signings. And when I saw her post on her Facebook page that she had met you at a book signing years ago when you were a college student, and that you had inspired her to learn to start writing, and that your book was out, and Jeanette really recommended it, and I immediately went and bought it and started listening to it. And Jeanette even emailed me and she said, Toby, you need to get Brittany on your podcast. And so I think it's so cool that Jeanette Walls inspired both of us to write our books and that somehow has connected us.
Yeah.
So I think that's awesome.
Me too. It's still surreal to me. I've admired her for so long.
Oh, she is something. Yes,
Yeah.
she is. She really is. And, you know, I've been listening to your book and wow, I just love it. And here I have the audio book. I'm going to put this up so people can see it. But we're going to talk a lot about this book. Hell, if we don't change our ways. So I can't wait to dig into that. But before we get started, can you tell me what your favorite color is and why?
It changes all the time. I really like pretty much all colors. As you can see, I'm a fan of pink.
Yes. Yes.
But I really like greens. I think because I really love gardening and being out in nature. So I just love the ranges of green.
I like that too. And, you know, especially in the spring when things start greening up and it's almost like someone took a paintbrush and just painted the whole world in every shade of green. It is really revitalizing, I think. So what's the hardest decision you've ever had to make?
I don't know if I can pinpoint an exact hardest one. There have been a lot of them. I think maybe one was when I was in high school and I moved in with a foster family, just choosing to stay there instead of going back when I felt like it was my responsibility to take care of my mom, regardless of the conditions. Like I really believed that. And so deciding to stay in this environment that was healthier for me and it felt like walking away from my mom and my brother and my family. That's probably
that is hard. Yeah, that makes sense. That is hard. You know, I had a situation in my childhood where I kind of felt responsible for all my brothers and sisters. And it really is hard to step away from that. So I can relate. Your book, Hell if we don't change our ways. The thing I love so much about that, not only is it just a really powerful story of overcoming so many things, but it's so different from other memoirs because there really isn't a story structure so much. I feel more like I'm inside your head and getting a peek at how you're thinking and how you're observing the world around you. It's almost like I'm reading your diary or your journal. And I just find that so compelling and so honest and so authentic. I just love it. So how long did it take you to write this book?
Hmm. Well, I think I really started it in college. I wasn't thinking of it necessarily as a book, but I had this wonderful creative writing teacher. She taught nonfiction, Jill Chrisman, and she has a book called Dark Room, which I also referred to a lot when I was writing. And yeah, I started writing like short essays about things that had happened, and she was so encouraging and pulled me aside and really affirmed to me that I was a writer. And so, yeah, that's where I first started writing about things that had happened in my life, because before that, I mostly worked with poetry.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to grad school and worked on some more essays. And then my final year, my thesis was, I turned in the first draft of the book.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So,
That's really interesting. Yeah.
yeah. So
I
probably
love
around
that.
2019 is when I
Mm-hmm.
actually started writing it and thinking of it as a book.
Yeah. That's interesting. I had been working on my book for 15 years, but it wasn't until about 2 or 3 years ago that I really got into it and thought of it as a book. And then once I got on the track, it goes a lot faster. But there was all those years of just writing things and pushing papers around and
Yeah.
not knowing where the beginning is or where the end is or even what matters. And it's such a process. And, how did it feel publishing your book? How did it feel putting that story out into the world?
Um, it's been kind of like that feeling when, I know this is a cliche, but when you're on a roller coaster and going up is like riding it and you're like, yeah, it's going to be a big deal. It's going to be out in the
Mm-hmm.
world. And then you reach the top and you're like, all right, I know what's coming. And then on the way down, your stomach starts flopping and you're
Yeah.
like,
And you're
oh,
like,
I
where the
thought I
heck are
knew,
we
but
going?
yeah. So it's been
Yeah.
a little frightening, but mostly exciting.
Yeah, it's just awesome. And I highly recommend it to everyone. So we're going to put a link to that in our show notes as well. So I just love it. You have so many things you could talk to us about. I know from reading your book, but can you tell us about a significant event in your life that knocked you down and how did you pick yourself up?
Yeah. Um, I think so. I didn't really talk about it in the book, but the the day I actually sold it to Zibby Books, my grandma
Oh,
passed away. Um,
oh,
and so I lost Lewis in the book, and then my cousin was killed, and then my grandma passed away, and I lost an uncle. So as I was going through this whole publishing whirlwind, I lost quite a few people. And that was, it was really hard. Like, one grief is already life changing. You have to become a whole new
mhm,
person. Um, so yeah, the past few years have been hard in that way. And I've really, I think the way I've dealt with it is, well, therapy and,
mhm,
relying on my support system, which has always been hard for me, just having to be self-reliant. I've
mhm.
come back to like trusting that I can actually rely on other people, which is really hard. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
I could tell it's hard, in reading your book because in so many places, there's just nobody you could rely on. You kind of just had to make your own space. So that would be hard to be able to trust someone, to let down those walls and feel free to trust someone.
yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And my mother died about, I think it's been 8 or 9 years ago. And she lived a good long time. She died when she was 78 or 79. But I still feel like an orphan, that my parents are gone. And it's a funny thing because I'm, not a child anymore. But there's just something about when you lose your grandparents and then you lose your parents. And it's just, you just kind of feel adrift. And it does take some time to get through it. And I can't imagine having all those losses at the same time you've got a publishing deal because on one hand, you're all excited and up and have lots to do. And on the other hand, you just need some time to just sit and chill and feel. So
Mhm.
that would have been a difficult thing.
Yeah.
Who has been your most important mentor?
Hmm. I really struggle with the like most or the best or
Yes,
questions like that
yes.
because I have so many. Yeah, there was Jill Chrisman, who
Mhm,
was the person in college. She took me aside and really made me feel like I wasn't just, like journaling aimlessly, which also a
mhm.
wonderful thing to do. um,
Yes, it is.
yeah. And then in grad school, two people who were super important to me, Inara Verzemnieks. She's a professor at the University of Iowa, and she just had this ability to like see to the heart of what I was trying to do with my work. And
Mhm,
we had conferences, and it wasn't just that she knew what I was trying to do, but she also knew like how I needed to hear her feedback. And she's so like warm and insightful and an amazing writer. And then Kiese Laymon, who taught for a semester at Iowa, the author of Heavy. Um, he was my first workshop at Iowa. And I think if it hadn't been with him, I don't know that I would have really felt
mm,
comfortable or felt like I was ready to write the things that I was writing in there and that
mhm.
ended up in the book. And he's been so supportive since the book came out, and also just someone I really admire his writing, his politics.
Mhm.
Just, I think he's an amazing person.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I really think, mentors mean so much to us. And often they don't even know what the impact they had on people. So I think
Mhm.
it's important to recognize them. Um, Tell me about the title of your book.
Yeah. So when I was a kid and I would ask, where are we going in the car? My mom would say, to hell if we don't change our ways. And it was just kind of like a joke that people told in the family. But I think it was
Mhm,
also her way of deflecting because she didn't know where we were going because we just wandered a lot. And then
mhm,
it was that. And then also through writing the book, I realized like I could see all of these echoes of like my great grandpa hurting my grandpa, and then my grandpa hurting my mom and her siblings, and then how that passed on to me and my generation
mhm,
in the family. And so to me, it was like, if we don't change our ways, if we don't find a better way of expressing our pain and building a better life for ourselves, then we will stay in this hell that is
mhm.
perpetuating violence.
I love that, and um, I do a lot of work with prison reform and reentry work. And, I always say that you have to break the chain at some point because it just keeps repeating if you don't. So that is
Mhm.
kind of what you're talking about, that there has to be a generation that says, stop, I'm not going to go this way. I'm doing something different. And then the world just opens up and changes. So it is so important. And in your book, you lived in your car for a while and
Mhm.
just kind of drifted from place to place with no destination, which seems on one hand kind of freeing and uh, powerful, but on the other hand, you didn't have any structure, any anchor to call home. And so, how did you deal with those things? How did you deal with going to different schools all the time or being in a new town?
Um, yeah, I think when I was around the age we were living in the car and moving all the time, it didn't feel that was my baseline. So to
Mhm,
me, it was just that's how things were. And the most important thing to me then was just being with my mom. And so I
mhm,
got that when we were in the car. It was like this little world where we were just together and we were surviving. Um, so I wasn't thinking like, I wish that we were in a house
right.
right now.
Mhm. That
um,
was your norm. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. I just love the story. So, you have so many, but can you tell us about a significant event in your life that knocked you down? And how did you pick yourself up and become stronger from it?
Yeah. I think when my brother Ben was kidnapped, that was that was kind of like a pivot point, because before that, like, things were hard and some awful things had happened to me, and I'd watched awful things happen to other people. But it was, what made it so terrible was that I was an older sister, and I would like beat him up sometimes, or we would get in fights, but it felt like it was my job to keep him safe. And it was kind of instilled in us that I was supposed to look out for him. And then this terrible thing happened while I was there. And then he got sent to live with his dad, and I was sent to live with Mark. And it was really hard just not having him there to process it. And I think it was actually a really long time before either of us like mourned that part of it. Like, I think he had to deal with a lot, but we had to come together later as adults and really process, like, not only did this awful thing happen, but then we were separated, which happened all the time, but it was different that time because it was like this crucial event, and then we didn't get to process it or survive it together.
Yes. That is hard.
Yeah. And
to just be ripped apart and not know how the other person's dealing with it, that is tough.
Yeah. So I think that one was a bit of a long-term getting up from it, because it was only as adults that we really like talked about it and pulled out all of the unspoken things. And I think having someone in your life who will be willing to like pull apart a hard thing is really important.
It is hard. It is really important. And, what you just said is powerful for people who are listening, because just because you had something that happened as a child and years have passed, maybe decades even, and you haven't dealt with it, that doesn't mean you can't deal with it and heal from it. There's always, the opportunity to go back and work through that. And I found that you kind of get this scab over these old wounds that you can't deal with, and you think they're healed and they're not. And when you start the journey of healing them, you kind of almost have to rip those scabs off and let the wounds bleed all over again and go right back into the trauma, and then work your way out of it healthily. So it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. And I love how honest you are about all these things in your book. You're just put yourself out there. You're so vulnerable and authentic that it really is a powerful read. I haven't finished yet, but I can't wait. It's my favorite thing. I'm actually having a total knee replacement surgery next week, and I'm bringing that book to the hospital with me so I can, because I think I'll have a lot of time to read. So,
yeah.
And I just love it. So tell us about a turning point in your life that propelled you in a new direction.
Yeah. I think just going to college, it was a really big turning point. One, I was on my own, so I had to figure out, like, how do I just survive, like, being homeless and struggling with money and all of that. I didn't really have like an idea of how to budget or like how do you pay rent, how do you find an apartment. And so it was kind of like plopped into this environment where, I mean, it's a huge adjustment for anyone, but for me it was like, how do I survive? How do I deal with, like, after being in constant survival mode, now I'm out, but like, how do I deal with just sitting with everything that happened? And it was also really important because I was in an abusive relationship, and in college was where I didn't have that like constant control and reinforcement. I still kind of did long distance for a while, but being in college gave me like the freedom to see that the situation wasn't good for me and that there was a way out, and that I was far enough away that I didn't have to be as scared if I left. And then also like working through religious trauma, I wasn't just enmeshed in like super insular, strict religious community. I was able to like figure out my own spirituality. So yeah, college for a lot of reasons.
Yes, I could see that. And What did you go to University of Iowa? Is that where you went for your undergrad as well?
I went to Ball State University in Muncie,
Ball
Indiana.
State University. Okay. Yeah, I'm familiar with that. And then you went to the University of Iowa for your graduate degree?
Hmm.
Cool. How'd you pick Ball State?
Really, I didn't have the best grades in school. I missed a lot and was moving too much to really, absorb what I was learning.
Right.
And I think like the last 2 years of high school, I really started to get it together. And by then, like I didn't really have the kind of record to get into like anything prestigious. So I was mainly looking at like state schools, and then I visited Ball State, and I really liked the campus. I liked that everything was walkable. And then another big part of it was like closer to my best friend Shirley, who lived in Newcastle, and Ball State was in Muncie. So we could visit each other. So maybe not like for profound reasons.
Right. That's good though. And that's another important lesson too, that just because you don't excel in high school does not mean that you can't go to college and make something of yourself. Because I do think college is an opportunity for people to find themselves. And it sounds like you did a lot of that.
Yeah.
So I think it's important for people to know that college is never off the table.
True.
I had 2 bachelor's degrees and when I married my second husband, and he would always introduce me as, this is my wife. She's the educated one. And it bugged me because it's like, Chris, you have so much life education. He was in the Navy and he lived all over the world for, 6 months in Israel, 6 months in Ireland, 6 months in Japan. He had all this experience that I didn't have. And so I got so tired of him saying, this is my wife, she's the educated one, that one day I signed him up for the community college in our town. And I said, you're enrolled, go pick your classes. And so he got his bachelor's degree. And while he was getting his bachelor's degree, I got 2 master's degrees. And so then he started introducing me as, this is my wife. She's the one with the graduate degrees. And I said, okay, you're getting one too. So now he has a master's degree too. But, anybody can benefit from going to college. And I really think just enrolling in a college and immersing yourself in the college culture changes the way you think, and it changes the people you hang out with, and it broadens your mind. And so definitely, I think it's a great way for anyone to break that cycle of family issues that are generationally long. College is a great way to jump in and start to break those chains. I love that. And I'm assuming, did you go to Iowa because you were interested in writing and they have such an awesome writing program there?
Yeah, I had applied to a few schools, and it was down to like Iowa or New Mexico were my 2 top choices. And I told another mentor, Kathy Day at Ball State, I was like, yeah, I got into these schools. And she was like, well, obviously you're going to Iowa. I was like, oh, okay.
Yes. They are really well known for their writing program. So I think that's awesome. Yeah, that makes so much sense to me. So many of these questions, I feel like they're questions I ask all my guests, but I think they're almost tailored for you. So was there ever a time you really felt imprisoned, and what did you do to liberate yourself?
Yeah. I think that abusive relationship through high school and into college. I got into such a place of not believing that leaving was possible. Like I remember literally saying, I don't think I'll ever be able to leave, and like breaking down. And it was just, it's hard to get into that mindset now and remember how exactly I like slowly lost myself and believed that I couldn't leave. But yeah, in college, I had my own apartment. We had a really big fight, and I just had like this thought that was like, this is never going to get better. Like we can have a few, like a honeymoon period for a few months, and maybe we won't fight. But the second I do something wrong, it'll always be this huge blowout where I end up apologizing for hours. And I had to like take that big, scary step of leaving, and then the even scarier step, which is like 100 steps of staying gone, even though your brain is screaming at you that you're doing something wrong. Yeah.
That is hard because you can live in an abusive situation for so long that it becomes your norm and you can justify it. And people always say, why don't you just leave? But they don't understand what it's like to be inside of an abusive relationship and feel powerless. So it does take a lot of courage and strength. And I haven't gotten to that point in your book, but I'm expecting we're going to learn something about that in the book. So, yeah. What's your favorite chapter in the book? What's the favorite story in the book for you?
I have a favorite section, or maybe two favorites.
Okay.
So one is a section on memory and how our memories are really unreliable. And I like that one because it was so helpful for me to write. It's about like the hippocampus and the way trauma affects memory. And I hope that people get something from it because I got a ton out of writing it. And then another section is about my decision not to have children and coinciding with my decision to get chickens.
I love chickens.
Yeah, me too. I have 5 of them outside right now. So if you see me glancing, I just have to
want names and personalities and
oh yes, yeah.
I love having chickens. They're pretty cool.
They're my pride and joy.
Yes, I can totally relate. It makes such a difference to have an animal in your life that you love. So, what's one question you wish I'd asked? Something else you might like to share with us that we haven't talked about?
I guess because you're also a writer and you have a really incredible story. Sorry, I'm losing my voice.
That's all right.
A question people ask me a lot is like, was it cathartic to write this book, or how have you changed from writing the book? And I would love to know your answer to that question.
Oh my gosh. It was amazing to write the book. I don't think I could have healed without it. And, when I was in prison, I had a bunch of journals and I would just sit and write. And I have a box of them on my desk. I have about 30 journals that I just filled in prison. And I referred back to them when I wrote my memoir, although really, I rewrote it from a more current frame of mind. But those journals pulled things out of me that I didn't even know were in there, and I have this belief that when you pick up a pen and you write with your hand, I think your hand is connected to your heart and it pulls out things you don't even know you feel. And you look at the paper and go, wow, I didn't even know that's how I felt. And it brings these things out so that you can acknowledge them and then start to heal from them. And I find when I sit down at a keyboard and start typing, it's all coming from my head and it's not the same. So I didn't write my whole book by hand, but I wrote the hard parts, out in my journals. And then I could read what I wrote to really remember how I was feeling and how that affected me. So I think writing is the best healing tool in the world. It just gives you the space to say how you're feeling without having to worry about the person you're talking to is going to accept you or not. Yeah. So I think it's so powerful. Yeah, I just love it. Yeah, that's excellent. How about you? Did you find writing to be healing?
Yeah. I've described it as it feels like it was an exorcism. Like I had all these hard memories.
Yes. Yes,
now
exactly.
They're like out of me and in a book. And, I still deal with them. They're just not as like urgent and painful as they were before I wrote it. Yeah.
Yeah. I have this thing, I call it the shame dragon. And actually I have a shame dragon sits on my desk here. But, the shame dragon, I had all this shame, and I couldn't deal with it because I couldn't hold it. It wasn't something I could push against because it was so foggy and unsubstantiated. But when I came up with the thought that this is a dragon, and it has these gnarly teeth and this smelly breath, and it gets in my face and roars fire at me, or it slams its tail and hits me in the chest. When I could picture it as a dragon, then I could fight it because it was something I could envision and push against. So I teach a course on slaying your shame dragon, and it is amazing to me how much it freed me when I gave a form to the thing I battled the most.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
I
beautiful.
tell you, there's nothing that heals the way writing does. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So what's one word that inspires you?
It's a goofy one, but dialectical.
I love it.
Yeah. To me, it was really important to break out of binary thinking that, like, the people who hurt me were just people who hurt me, or the things I've done wrong are like irreversible and self-defining. And they're still defining, but I think when I was able to hold conflicting ideas in my mind at the same time, it really helped my healing, and it helped my ability to move through the world. So it's a bit of like a grad school word, but I think I hope other people can get into dialectical thinking.
I love it. I'm going to do some research on that a little bit too, because that's really intriguing to me. So what's next in Brittany Means' world? Is there another book coming? Is there, what are your plans? How does your future look 5 years from now in your mind?
Well, I'll probably have more chickens for one.
Yes.
But I'm working on my second book, which is about how delusions manifest in religious communities and my family's health and stigmata. Who knows how much of what I have now will actually be in the final book, but I'm really excited by it because it's more to process, and also stigmata is very interesting.
I can't wait to read that one too. You have so many experiences, and you're so young, really, for having all this in your background. It's just amazing to me. And I just admire what you're doing. I think you're a powerful and strong woman, and I am so delighted to be able to have you on my podcast, because I think that there are so many people out there that can relate to your story and be inspired to change their own lives. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
You are so welcome. It's been my delight. Thank you for joining me on Fierce Conversations with Toby. Your support and listening means so much to me, and I hope today's conversation makes a difference in your world. If you would like to support this podcast, there are many ways to do so. I found these ways tend to help the most in getting our message out into the world. Number 1, subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to or watch this podcast. If you can leave a 5-star rating or a like on this episode on YouTube, that helps even more. And if you leave a comment or a review, that helps the most. The next way you can support Fierce Conversations with Toby is to join our Patreon at patreon.com/fierceconversations. All tiers come with a downloadable digital gratitude journal created by me and membership in a private Facebook group that I also lead. Most importantly, 10% of all proceeds from your subscription will go directly to donating my workbooks to women in prison. Finally, sharing the link to this show with your friends, family, and anyone who wants to listen is appreciated more than I can say. Thank you again for joining me today and supporting this show by listening to it and sharing it with friends. Fierce Conversations is created and hosted by me, Toby Dorr. Produced by Number 3 Productions. The theme song that you're hearing now, Groovin', was composed and arranged by Lisa Plass. Lisa also plays the flute for the theme, with Carolyn Parody on piano and Tony Ventura on bass. Find out more at tobydor.com. This is Fierce Conversations with Toby. Escape your prison.